trying out acrylic gouache from Holbein. These were sent to me by Artillery Philippines, and if you guys don't know, they are one of the big online art supply stores in the country. This wasn't sponsored, they just sent these to me for free. Also, this wasn't the only thing they sent to me, so I will be doing another unboxing and trying out of everything else they sent. So if you want to see that, just watch out for that probably on my next few videos. But for now, I really wanted to do a completely separate video for these acrylic gouache. They are so cool. I didn't know they were gonna send me this full-sized thing. I thought they were just gonna send me like small tubes just for me to try out, and I'm so excited that they sent these to me. And also, if you guys don't know, this is my first time trying out acrylic gouache. I've only ever tried traditional gouache from Mia and also from Holbein. For a second, I was confused about the name because I see a lot of reviewers use Acryla Gouache and not a lot of reviews for acrylic gouache. For a second, I thought it was just their student line, and I was kind of confused by, because I have heard before that Holbein only makes professional grade art supplies. And so I emailed them, and they said that for the past year they've been transitioning between calling it acrylic gouache to just acrylic gouache. So this set is the exact same paint as the ones they named acrylic gouache. Just if anyone's wondering, this school set comes in this really cool container with the lid that doubles as a mixing palette with 3 brushes, which I will be trying out for this video too. The tubes are all 12 milliliters except for the white one, which is 20 milliliters. I love this whole setup because I could just use all of this to paint, and the only thing I'll need is maybe a cup of water and I'm already set to paint. The paper I'm going to be using was also sent to me by Artillery, and I will be talking more about it on my next video, but I can already say that I love this. This is a Winsor & Newton watercolor paper, but I will be digging for more information about that one too on my next video. But I already really love this one, especially for gouache. I think they work really well together. And I also translated some of the writing in the box because I think they're all Japanese. There's just some safety precautions. They're basically just saying to never eat or drink while painting, and don't let the paints near children. I think it's pretty standard, but one thing, because it all dries completely and it doesn't become water soluble then when it dries, you always need to wash your brushes after you use them. I actually wash mine when I'm switching between brushes because your paint might dry out and you might ruin your brushes, which has happened to me before with acrylics. So you might want to keep that in mind when you paint with these. I will also be putting all of the translated versions of the little manual that they have on that came with the set, just so you guys can see if you want some more information about these paints. But for now, we are moving on to my sample artwork, and I started with a very loose layer as I would with regular gouache, and I think they behaved like regular gouache on this stage. Well, it reacted like the regular Holbein gouache because I feel like with gouache, if it's not too high of a quality, it might not be as finely ground, so you will get a lot of streakiness when you're working on very loose layers like this one. So with gouache, I feel like the higher the quality it is, the closer it will feel to watercolors when you're really watering it down. And I feel like it's the same for this one. They really worked like watercolors, and they worked amazingly well when you add a lot of water to them, which I wasn't expecting. And I just realized that I forgot to use my other 1-inch brush for the first layer, but I believe I used the brushes that came with the set for the rest of the painting. And one thing I can say about them is that they don't feel that premium. They kind of feel very light and hollow, but the bristles themselves are great. They're surprisingly soft but still kept their shape, which is like my favorite kind of brush. So for something that came with a set, I don't just think they're usable, I kind of really enjoyed using them. When I started the second layer, I was much more apprehensive because I was using the same care and fear I would have with, well, if I was using regular gouache, because with that you never want to use thick layers too early because you might reactivate them when you're working on top of them later on. But then I remember that this was acrylic gouache and they dry fully, and that's like their whole point. So as soon as I remember that, I had a lot more time playing around with this painting. I could experiment with colors that I wouldn't be using on a painting like this before, like the green I kind of put over the whole painting. And I started it with her hair because I like having green on lighter hair. After I realized that it worked with the piece, I kind of just put it on the rest of her too. So because of how forgiving acrylic gouache is, because it would let me layer and layer on top of my older layers, I had more fun with this painting than I would have with my regular gouache. And I really hate to say this because I just spent a lot of money on getting bigger tubes of my regular Holbein gouache, but I think I might like the acrylic gouache much better. And I'm so thankful for Artillery for sending these to me because I had no intention of even trying these. And one of the things that put me off about them was that they would dry on the palette a lot quicker and won't be able to be reactivated, and that really discouraged me from trying out acrylic gouache because, especially coming from watercolors and regular gouache, I'm so used to not cleaning my palette. Well, actually for Mia gouache, I clean my palette often because those colors just don't mix as well as the Holbein gouache. I usually have a fear of wasting paint, and just even thinking of having my palette not be reusable after one painting, that just really scared me out of trying acrylic gouache at all. But then when you think about it, that's an easy fix because these come in tubes. You can just go ahead and squeeze out as little as you need and you're good to go. And seriously, don't squeeze out so much because you can always mix more colors later on, but you can never reuse the paint once they're dry. This leads me to my other thing that I was scared about with acrylic gouache. I was scared that when I was working with them, because the paints would dry and I was working with complicated mixes, it would be hard for me to replicate the exact same mix when it's dry. But really, they didn't dry as quickly as I thought. For the whole time I was working with them, I think it was for about an hour and a half, and the paints did not dry at all. And I know there are precautions you can do to stretch out the time you can work with them, like putting a wet paper towel on your palette and then layering baking paper on top of that. Presumably these will make the paint not dry as quickly, but I didn't do that because I wanted to just work with the paints as they are. So of course I kind of expected these to just dry out on my palette really quickly, but it didn't really happen. I was able to work on this thing for quite a while. I only noticed that they dried the next day when I went to finish the rest of her painting, like for her dress. I think one factor for that is that relatively this isn't such a big painting, so I'm not really working on it for that long of a time. But still, these performed extremely well. And also on the next day while I was working on it and I was already working on fresher paints, I forgot to squeeze out, I think it was the blue, and I was only working on the red and the white. I was missing some blue and there was dried blue on my palette, and I kind of like worked my brush on that dried paint and it did still tint the mixture that I wanted it to. So I think that even though they dried, they were still workable. It's not like regular acrylics where they're just dry fully. You won't be able to use them as regular mixes, but if you want to tint your colors with your dried mix, I think they would still work. And so I really don't know what else to say, except I think these worked exactly how I expected regular gouache to work. So if you look at especially the video I did where I was painting Jane from Breaking Bad, I got so frustrated with that one because of how I would accidentally reactivate my layers underneath. And that just comes with experience. When you're working with regular gouache, you learn to work with that as you go on. I think I wasn't as experienced as I needed to be, and so a lot of my dreams and hopes were shattered when I realized how temperamental regular gouache really was. So in some ways, I wished I discovered these before regular gouache, because they feel more of a natural progression to use these before the regular gouache, because that one really requires a lot more experience to master. And so because I didn't have the fear of the layers being looser than the ones underneath, I could play around with the colors so much better. I'm experimenting as I go along, and I'm having fun with the colors that I'm choosing, and it just is an easier process overall. Now that I've gone ahead and compared them to the regular gouache, I want to compare them to acrylics, but there's a very big disclaimer in which I do not have the same experience with acrylics as I do with gouache. So I've only ever tried the Liquitex basics paint, so take what I say on this segment with a grain of salt. So the first big difference between them, it's the obvious one, is the finish. These dry matte, so instead of having that glossy finish like regular acrylics do, these ones just dry matte, and so there is not much of a disparity between how it would look from different angles. It doesn't look different depending on how the light will hit it. And also this just feels much more velvety than acrylics, and it just feels different. I wish I could explain it better. The only word that I can think of is velvety. It just feels smoother when I'm mixing the paints, and it feels smoother when I'm laying it on the paper. And one other thing is that it doesn't dry as fast as acrylics. But then again, I've only ever tried one brand. They also sent me Mia acrylics, which I will be trying out on my next video. So I'm excited to see if regular acrylics do dry as quickly as these Acryla Gouache. But I really enjoyed painting with these. I think even though I said I love these more than my regular gouache, I think they both have different uses, so I can get very different styles of painting with the two paints. So if I was doing a more blended, like finished look, I would go with my regular gouache, just because those, even when you've worked on them for days, can still reactivate the layers that you don't like, so you can just work on them, which is something that I liked, especially for my last video. That really came in handy. But if I was going for a more unfinished, not blended look, I don't know how to describe it, I would go for my Acryla Gouache. And so I have different uses for different things. I don't think one is better than the other, but I do think that one is easier to work with than the other, and that's the Acryla Gouache. So in conclusion, I really love these. I think it takes the best things out of both acrylics and gouache. So we'll have the velvety texture of regular gouache and the nice matte finish, and then the fact that it doesn't reactivate like acrylics, I think that makes them into a much happier medium. And so that is it for my thoughts on Acryla Gouache. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I really enjoyed making this, and I will be seeing you again soon.